The house was too quiet. Amelia Hart had grown accustomed to silence, the kind that clung to the walls of her mansion like a heavy perfume. It was not the peaceful silence of contentment but the hollow stillness of absence, of people, of laughter, of anything real. Her Mulholland Drive estate had been designed to impress, a glass fortress with sweeping views of Los Angeles, sprawling infinity pools, imported stone floors, and walls that caught the sunset and turned it into fire. From the outside, the house suggested life, glamour, extravagance. From within, it felt like a museum in which the exhibits had been stolen. On this Friday night, Amelia sat at the marble counter in her kitchen, a glass of Merlot untouched before her. The city sparkled in the valley below, but she had no desire to join it. She had been invited to 3 different events that evening: an after-party for the latest superhero movie, a gala at the Beverly Hilton, and an intimate dinner with the kind of studio executive who could greenlight a project with a single nod. 10 years ago she would have attended all 3 in a single evening, changing gowns in limousines, flashing smiles to cameras, her laughter like champagne. Now at 42 she was tired. Her beauty had not faded. If anything, it had sharpened, matured into something statuesque and commanding. The magazines still called her the queen of the screen. Directors still praised her range, her discipline, her uncanny ability to vanish into a role. She was every casting director's dream, every producer's safety net. But the weight of that crown grew heavier with each passing year. She glanced at her reflection in the glass of wine. The distorted image showed her alabaster skin, cheekbones that could cut glass, eyes a glacial blue framed by meticulously curled lashes. Her hair, a golden cascade tonight, had been styled earlier for a shoot she had cancelled at the last minute. A star's face, a star's hair, a star's life. All polish. All performance. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She ignored it. Probably Darren, her agent, reminding her of the campaign she was scheduled to front for a luxury watch company. Or perhaps an acquaintance pretending to check in, when really they wanted to know why she wasn't being photographed that night. Everyone wanted something. Amelia took a breath, closed her eyes, and felt the old familiar emptiness pressing in. It was the kind that fame couldn't fill, that applause couldn't quiet. She had dated men who looked good on red carpets but collapsed under the weight of her spotlight. She had been courted by producers who wanted to possess her like a trophy and by actors who wanted to compete with her like rivals. None of them had seen her. She reached for the wine, then pushed it away. The food on the counter, seared salmon with steamed greens, prepared by her current chef, looked like something out of a magazine spread. Flawless, calorie-conscious, uninspired. Amelia lifted her fork, then dropped it again. Even meals had become a performance, staged for health, appearance, and discipline. She thought briefly of firing him. Finding someone different. Someone who could make food taste alive again. The thought drifted away and she wandered toward her office. She didn't know that in less than a week, that idle thought would turn her life upside down. Monday morning arrived with a dull haze. Amelia sat at her glass desk, pretending to read a new script. Words blurred on the page and the characters felt like cardboard cutouts. A knock sounded at the doorframe. Miranda, her house manager, appeared, composed as always. A trim woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense bun and sharp suits, Miranda had kept Amelia's household running like a studio set for years. "Miss Hart," she said in her usual clipped tone, "your new chef has arrived." Amelia looked up, startled. "New chef?" "Yes," Miranda replied. "You mentioned last week that you were dissatisfied with Mr. Field's cooking. I took the liberty of finding a replacement." Amelia blinked. She had only murmured the thought, not meant it seriously. But Miranda was efficient to a fault. "He comes highly recommended," Miranda continued. "A rising talent. Trained in New York, worked briefly in Paris, originally from Nigeria. His name is Kofi Adewale." Amelia arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "And you've already hired him?" "I considered it a trial, Miss Hart. If he displeases you, we'll make other arrangements." Amelia sighed. She was too tired to argue. "Fine. Send him in." A moment later the door opened and he stepped inside. Kofi Adewale. Amelia had expected another pale, nervous young man desperate to attach his name to hers, someone who would cook carefully, blandly, safely. Instead, the man before her was different. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to fill the room. His skin was a deep, rich brown that seemed to glow under the California light. His black curls were cropped short, and his features were strong, proud. A square jaw, full lips, steady eyes the color of midnight. He wore a simple white chef's coat, but on him it looked elegant. Miss Hart, he said, his voice smooth and resonant, touched with an accent that rolled his vowels like music. It is an honor to meet you. For a moment, Amelia found herself staring. Then she gathered her composure, nodding coolly. Welcome, Mr. Adewale. Let's see if your food lives up to your resume. Kofi smiled, not arrogant, not nervous, just sure of himself in a way that unsettled her. It will, he said simply. That evening, Amelia drifted toward the kitchen, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. Normally she avoided the staff while they worked. The kitchen was not her domain, it was the backstage of her home. But tonight, the air was alive with unfamiliar scents. Peppers, garlic, ginger, something earthy and warm. She stepped inside. The kitchen had never looked so alive. Kofi moved like a dancer, chopping swiftly, stirring deliberately, tasting with small nods of approval. The counters were filled with bowls of bright ingredients she didn't recognize. The sizzle of oil and the rhythmic scrape of a wooden spoon filled the silence. What are you making? She asked, surprising herself. Kofi turned, startled, then smiled. His smile transformed his face, softening his strong features into something open, disarming. Pepper soup, he replied. My grandmother's recipe. Back home, it is what we cook when someone is ill or tired or in need of comfort. Amelia raised an eyebrow. I don't usually eat soup. Kofi tilted his head, eyes gleaming. You will eat this one. It wasn't a question. Minutes later, a bowl was placed before her. The broth shimmered golden red, steam curling upward. Amelia hesitated, then lifted the spoon. The first taste was a revelation. The heat was sharp but soothing, the flavors layered, ginger, chili, something citrusy. It wasn't just food. It was memory, culture, love, all carried in a single bite. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She set the spoon down, blinking against sudden tears. This, she whispered, is the first thing in months that doesn't feel empty. When she looked up, Kofi was watching her. Not with the gaze she was used to, hungry, appraising, judgmental, but with quiet recognition. As though he saw her not as a star, not as a brand, but simply as Amelia. She looked away quickly, unsettled. Kofi only smiled and turned back to the stove. But Amelia knew something had shifted. Something small, dangerous, inevitable. The next morning, Amelia padded into the kitchen barefoot, wearing a silk robe. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she tasted that soup again. The warmth of it, the way it had reached into some hollow place inside her. Kofi was already there, sleeves rolled to his elbows, humming softly in Yoruba as he worked. The rich, rhythmic language lilted through the room, transforming the sterile kitchen into something almost intimate. Amelia stopped at the doorway watching him move. There was something deliberate about the way he handled food. Every slice of the knife, every stir of the spoon carried intention. He didn't perform for her approval. He cooked as though the ingredients themselves deserved respect. Good morning, Miss Hart, he said without turning, as if he had sensed her presence. Amelia blinked, caught off guard. You're up early. He smiled faintly. A chef is always up before his guests. Would you like breakfast? She almost said no. 4 years she had lived on green juice and yogurt cups carefully portioned by dietitians. Breakfast was fuel, not pleasure. But something about his tone disarmed her. What are you making? She asked, stepping closer. Akara, he said, pointing to the bowl of batter. Bean fritters from home. Fried golden, soft inside. My mother made them every Saturday morning. He spooned the mixture into hot oil. The kitchen filled with a savory aroma that made her stomach growl. Amelia sat at the counter, fascinated. You said you trained in New York, she said. But your food, it feels very personal. Kofi glanced at her, eyes steady. Cooking without memory is just chemistry. The great chefs in France taught me technique. But the food that matters to me, the food that makes people feel, comes from here. He tapped his chest. When he placed a plate before her, the fritters were crisp, golden brown, steaming inside. Amelia hesitated, then picked one up, burning her fingers slightly. She laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in weeks. It was delicious, crunchy, savory, with a warmth that lingered on her tongue. You're going to ruin me, she murmured. If I keep eating this, I'll never fit into my gowns again. Kofi chuckled. Then we'll run in the mornings. Balance. The casual we made her chest tighten. She covered it with a sip of coffee, pretending not to notice. Later that day she called Miranda into her office. Where did you find him? Amelia asked. Miranda, ever composed, folded her hands. Through a recommendation. He worked briefly at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan but left after creative disagreements. Too much fusion, not enough authenticity, he claimed. Since then he has done private work. Why would someone like that want to cook for me? Miranda hesitated. Talent needs patronage, Miss Hart. Perhaps he sees opportunity here. Amelia frowned. The idea of being someone's opportunity unsettled her. Yet when she thought of his quiet confidence, his food that seemed to carry entire worlds in a single bowl, she felt something else too. Curiosity. Over the next week, Amelia found herself gravitating to the kitchen more often. She told herself it was only for the food: braised short ribs infused with spices she'd never tasted, delicate pastries that melted on her tongue, grilled fish wrapped in banana leaves. But it wasn't just that. It was the way Kofi told stories while he cooked. About his childhood in Lagos, chasing after street vendors who sold puff-puff balls dusted with sugar. About his grandmother, who had taught him that every spice had a spirit. About the scholarship that took him to culinary school in New York, where he had been both celebrated for his skill and dismissed for his accent. Amelia listened, captivated. In his stories, she found a kind of authenticity she hadn't known she was starving for. Hollywood was built on reinvention, on polishing away the raw edges. Kofi seemed to hold on to his edges fiercely, unapologetically. "You could run your own restaurant," she said one night, sipping wine while he prepared a stew that filled the house with warmth. "One day," he admitted. "But it takes money. Investors. Connections." He gave her a wry smile. "Things I don't have." She felt a pang of something she couldn't name. Guilt? Admiration? Both. The first crack in her composure came at the end of that week. She had returned home late from a meeting with her publicist, irritated by another round of image management. The tabloids had been ruthless lately, speculating about her age, her single status, whether her career was slowing. Amelia hated how the world treated women over 40 as expired goods. She slammed her keys on the counter harder than intended. Kofi was there, ladling soup into a bowl. Without a word, he pushed it toward her. She wanted to brush him off, to retreat into her room. Instead, she sat. She took a sip. And just like that, the tension broke. The warmth seeped into her, easing her anger, her exhaustion. Her eyes filled again with tears she couldn't quite control. "Bad day?" he asked softly. "They all feel bad lately," she admitted before she could stop herself. Kofi didn't offer clichés or empty comfort. He only nodded as though he understood. For Amelia Hart, who had spent decades surrounded by people who wanted things from her, the simplicity of that moment was unbearable. She excused herself quickly, fleeing to her room. Behind her, Kofi said nothing. But the air between them shifted again, subtle, dangerous, alive. It had rained in Los Angeles. A rare thing, but when it happened, the city seemed transformed. The usual sharp glitter of palm trees and neon dulled under gray skies, and for once the Hollywood Hills looked almost melancholy. Amelia sat by her window, watching drops roll down the glass like they were racing each other, when she heard the familiar sounds from the kitchen. Garlic sizzling, oil hissing, the rhythmic clatter of a knife against wood. She hadn't intended to go down. She told herself she would stay in her study, work through the pile of scripts, maybe call Darren about the pending film offer. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself standing barefoot at the doorway to the kitchen again, her robe wrapped tightly around her. Kofi was at the stove, bent slightly over the simmering pot, tasting with a wooden spoon. He looked up as though he had expected her. "You're early," she said. "You're restless," he countered with that half-smile that both disarmed and irritated her. "What are you making this time?" "Pepper soup. Again. You need it?" Amelia arched an eyebrow. "Do I look sick?" "You look tired." He returned to stirring, unbothered by her frosty tone. "In my country, pepper soup is not only for the sick. It is for the weary. For those who carry weight." She should have walked away. But the aroma caught her, the sharp heat of chili, the citrus tang of lemongrass, something smoky beneath it. She sat at the counter, folding her arms. "You're very sure of yourself." "No," he said without looking up. "I'm sure of the food." The simplicity of it struck her. In Hollywood, everyone sold themselves, agents, actors, producers, all spinning promises. Kofi didn't sell. He served. And somehow, that made his presence even more commanding. When he placed the bowl before her, Amelia hesitated. Then she picked up the spoon. The first taste hit her like it had the first night. Spicy, soothing, layered with flavors that seemed to tell a story. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Kofi leaned against the counter opposite her, watching her quietly. "You hide it well," he said at last. He opened her eyes. "Hide what?" "The sadness." His tone wasn't pitying, just matter of fact. Most people hide behind noise. Parties, friends, endless talking. You hide behind silence. And work. For a long moment, Amelia could only stare at him. She was used to journalists prying, lovers guessing, agents advising. But no one ever saw. "You presume a lot for someone I only hired last week," she said finally. Kofi didn't flinch. "I only said what I see." She wanted to snap back to remind him of his place. But instead, words slipped from her lips before she could stop them. "I haven't been happy in years." The confession hung in the air, raw and dangerous. Amelia's hands trembled slightly as she set the spoon down. No cameras, no audience, no script. Just the truth laid bare in front of the one man who should have been invisible in her world. Kofi said nothing. He only nodded, as though accepting it, holding it for her so she didn't have to carry it alone. For reasons she couldn't explain that made her eyes burn. She looked away, blinking furiously. "Do you know why I cook?" he asked after a while. She shook her head. "When I was a boy, my grandmother used to tell me that food was not just for the body, it was for the soul. She said a meal could carry memory, healing, even love. She believed if you cooked with honesty, people could taste it. Even if they didn't know what was missing in their lives." Amelia swallowed hard. "And what do you think my life is missing?" Kofi's gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "Something real." The words cut through her like glass. Something real. For 20 years, Amelia had lived in a world of illusion. The gowns, the awards, the smiles, it was all a stage. And here, in her own kitchen, a man she barely knew had named the hollow at her center. She rose abruptly, leaving the soup half finished. "Thank you, Kofi," she said tightly, her voice clipped back into control. "That will be all." He bowed his head slightly, but his eyes never wavered. When Amelia shut the door to her room that night, she pressed her palms against it and closed her eyes. She could still taste the pepper soup on her tongue, but worse, she could still feel the echo of his words in her chest. Something real. It terrified her more than any scandal, any headline, any fading spotlight ever could. The following week blurred with the usual demands of Hollywood. Amelia had meetings with her agent, fittings with designers, and lunches with producers who wanted her attached to projects she couldn't care less about. She played the role of Amelia Hart, Hollywood's queen, flawlessly, smiling when expected, nodding at the right times, even laughing when the jokes were predictable. But every night she came home to the same thing, the sound of Kofi in her kitchen. At first she told herself it was only about the food. The meals were unlike anything she had ever tasted, full of color and memory, a rebellion against the sterile perfection of Hollywood's diet culture. But the truth lingered under every bite. It wasn't only the food she craved. It was him. One evening, Amelia entered the kitchen to find him kneading dough, forearms taut, flour dusting his dark skin. He was humming again, some song she didn't know but that carried a rhythm that made her heartbeat catch. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You always sing when you cook." "It's not singing," he said without looking up. "It's prayer." Her brow arched. "Prayer?" He nodded, still working the dough. "My grandmother taught me. She said food absorbs the spirit of the cook. If your mind is angry, the food will taste bitter. If you cook with joy, it will nourish more than the body." Amelia tilted her head, studying him. "And what are you praying for now?" Kofi finally looked at her, and the intensity of his gaze made her chest tighten. "Patience." Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned quickly, pretending to examine the bottles of wine stacked neatly on the counter. Her pulse was louder than it should have been. Later, she sat at the counter with a glass of wine while he prepared dinner. It was late and she had already dismissed the rest of the staff. It felt almost domestic, almost normal, like the life of a woman who wasn't watched by the world. "You should cook on television," she said lightly, swirling the wine in her glass. "The world loves a handsome chef with a story." Kofi chuckled. "And who would watch me? An immigrant with an accent, cooking food half of them can't even pronounce." "They'd watch," Amelia said. "Because you're different." His smile faded into something quieter. Different doesn't always sell. There was no bitterness in his tone, only truth. Amelia felt it land heavily between them. She had built her career on being different, but only within the narrow lines Hollywood allowed. A white woman could reinvent herself 100 ways. A young black man with an accent? The world didn't forgive so easily. "Maybe you need someone to believe in you," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and searching. "And are you volunteering, Ms. Hart?" The question carried no mockery, only challenge. Amelia looked away quickly, her throat dry. The tension came to a head 2 nights later. She had returned from a charity event, her gown heavy with sequins, her heels biting into her feet. The cameras had been relentless, questions about her single life, asked with rehearsed sympathy. She had smiled, given them the lines they wanted, and escaped as quickly as she could. When she entered the kitchen, Kofi was still there, cleaning up from dinner. He looked up as she walked in, still glittering like a diamond under the soft kitchen lights. "You look tired," he said simply. She laughed brittle. "You always say that. Because it's always true." Something in his tone, gentle, unpolished, undid her. She leaned against the counter, her shoulders slumping. "I'm so tired of pretending," she whispered, not sure why she said it aloud. Kofi set the dish towel aside, stepping closer. The space between them seemed suddenly charged, alive. "Then stop," he said quietly. She looked up at him, their faces inches apart now. She could smell the faint spice on his skin, the warmth of the kitchen wrapping around them. Her breath caught. For a long, suspended moment, the air was fire. His eyes locked on hers, steady and unafraid. She could feel the pull between them, magnetic, reckless. Her hand twitched toward him, then she pulled it back as though burned. "I can't," she said hoarsely. Kofi didn't move. He didn't press. He only nodded as though he understood and stepped back. But as Amelia fled to her room that night, her pulse still racing, she knew the truth. The fire had already been lit. And it would not be contained for long. The week of the Cannes Film Gala was supposed to be a triumph for Amelia Hart. She had been invited to present an award, her designer gown was hand-stitched by Dior, and her face was on the cover of Vanity Fair. Every headline framed her as untouchable, the enduring queen of Hollywood. But Amelia knew the truth, she felt like glass. The night of the gala dragged on in a blur of champagne and artificial smiles. She laughed too loudly at jokes she didn't hear, posed with men who whispered things into her ear they thought were clever, and endured the familiar sting of questions about her age, her single status, and when she might finally settle down. By the time the last flashbulb went off, Amelia wanted nothing more than to disappear. Kofi was waiting at the house when she returned past midnight, her gown weighing on her shoulders like armor. He had been cleaning the counters, his sleeves rolled up, his body glistening slightly from the heat of the kitchen. "Long night?" he asked gently. Amelia laughed without humor as she dropped her clutch onto the counter. "Like every other. Empty." Kofi's eyes searched hers, steady and unyielding. "You don't look empty. You look tired of being seen and never known." The words hit her harder than she expected. She swallowed, throat tight. "You make it sound so simple." "Sometimes it is," he said softly. For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and trembling. Amelia stepped closer without thinking, drawn into the warmth of him, into the solid presence that felt more real than anything she had touched in months. Her hand brushed against his arm as she steadied herself against the counter. The contact was light, fleeting, but it was enough to send a jolt through her veins. Kofi froze, his eyes locked on hers. "Amelia," he said quietly, her name a warning, a plea. She should have stepped back. She knew the world she lived in, the rules that bound her. But in that moment, rules felt like shackles and she wanted nothing more than to break them. Her breath came fast. "I don't want to be alone tonight." His jaw tightened, his hand flexing at his side as though he were fighting himself. "If we cross this line there is no going back." "I know." The words were out before she could stop them. And then she was leaning in, or maybe he was, she could never tell. Their lips met in a rush, a collision of hunger and hesitation that sent sparks racing through her body. The kiss was fierce, unpracticed, desperate. Years of restraint shattered in that single moment. Kofi's hands found her waist, steady and strong, pulling her closer. She pressed into him, feeling the warmth of his chest against hers, her sequined gown rough under his touch. It was reckless, intoxicating, dangerous, and Amelia had never felt so alive. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the room seemed impossibly quiet. Her eyes darted to his, searching for regret, but found only the same fire she felt burning inside herself. "This is madness," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, his voice low. "But it's real." For the first time in years, Amelia didn't feel like a character on a stage. She felt like a woman, wanted, desired, alive. And though the weight of the world waited outside those walls in that moment, under the dim lights of her kitchen, she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the kiss, Amelia woke with sunlight spilling across her silk sheets and a storm raging inside her chest. She had dreamt of Kofi all night. His hands steady on her waist, the heat of his lips, the way he had looked at her as if she were something more than an image on a screen. But when she descended into the kitchen, he was already there, back in his uniform of quiet professionalism. He greeted her with the same polite tone as always, bowing his head slightly as though the night before had been a mistake best forgotten. "Breakfast?" he asked. For a heartbeat, Amelia wanted to demand more, to remind him of the fire that had sparked between them, but she forced herself into a brittle smile. "Yes, please." They said nothing else. But every glance that lingered too long, every brush of their hands when passing dishes, told a story words could not. The following week their affair unfolded like a dangerous game of chess. In the afternoons, when the house was quiet and the staff were gone, Amelia would linger in the kitchen. She would sip wine at the counter, watching him move with practiced grace, her laughter softer now, more private. Sometimes he would cook only for her, experimenting with dishes he said reminded him of home. She would sit cross-legged on the marble countertop, breaking every etiquette rule she had ever followed, and feed herself with her fingers while he watched, amused and entranced. And sometimes, when the world outside grew too heavy, they would steal kisses in the pantry, pressed against shelves of spices, their breaths tangled in heat and fear. It was reckless. It was intoxicating. It was inevitable. But secrecy came with its own dangers. One evening, as Amelia and Kofi lingered too close in the hallway, her longtime housekeeper, Lydia, appeared unexpectedly with a tray of linens. Her eyes flicked between them, sharp and suspicious. "Everything all right, Ms. Hart?" Lydia asked, her tone polite but her gaze heavy. Amelia's pulse spiked. She forced a smile, her hand sliding quickly away from Kofi's arm. "Of course. Just discussing tomorrow's menu." Lydia didn't press, but Amelia felt the weight of the woman's stare long after she had left. That night, lying awake, Amelia realized how fragile the illusion was. All it would take was one whispered rumor, one photograph, and everything, her career, her reputation, his livelihood, would burn. And yet, when Kofi slipped quietly into her room hours later, the danger only made his touch sweeter. In the shadows of her bedroom, they were no longer actress and employee, no longer bound by Hollywood's cruel rules. They were only Amelia and Kofi, skin against skin, their whispers threaded with laughter and longing. "I don't know how long we can keep this hidden," Amelia murmured one night, her head resting against his chest. "As long as we have to," Kofi said. "The world doesn't have to understand us. It only has to stay out of our way." Amelia wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe love could be enough to shield them from the storm she knew was coming. But outside those walls, the world was always watching. And in Hollywood, secrets never stayed secrets for long. The first whisper came in the form of a blind item. Amelia was on her Pilates mat when her publicist, Marjorie, called in a frenzy. "Don't panic," Marjorie said, which immediately made Amelia panic. "It's Dumois." A tip came in about a silver-haired Hollywood darling seen getting cozy with a younger staff member in her home. Amelia's stomach dropped. "That could be anyone," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Of course," Marjorie agreed, though her tone carried doubt. "But we need to be careful. Paparazzi are going to start circling. You know how this town works, where there's smoke, they'll light the fire themselves." Amelia ended the call with her heart pounding. She turned toward the kitchen, where Kofi was humming softly as he chopped vegetables, unaware of the storm brewing. She didn't tell him. Not yet. The following week was torture. At a charity luncheon, Amelia overheard two actresses whispering at her table. "She's glowing, isn't she? Too glowing. And did you hear? She fired her last chef suddenly. Some say she replaced him with someone much younger." Amelia forced herself to smile through their chatter, but every laugh she gave was brittle, every sip of champagne sharp in her throat. That night, when she returned home, she found herself standing at the threshold of the kitchen, watching Kofi with a heaviness she couldn't shake. "Kofi," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. He looked up, concern flickering in his eyes. "What's wrong?" "People are talking. About me. About us." He set down the knife, wiping his hands slowly on a towel. "Then we give them nothing to see."